Dust hung heavy in the late afternoon sun, settling over the wooden planks of Dustwick's main street like a golden haze. The wind carried the faint scent of horses and coal smoke from the distant train tracks. Mingling with the sharper temps of whiskey and fried meat drifting from the saloons that lined the thoroughfare, townsfolk moved with a slow urgency, boots scraping boards, spurs jingling, and hats pulled low against the sun. It was the kind of place where stories were whispered in corners and secrets traveled faster than the desert wind. From the shadows of the far end of the street, a lone figure emerged, sturdy boots crunching gravel, eyes sharp beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the wilderness and lived to tell it. Each step measured, purposeful. His coat was dark, worn at the seams, and a rifle rested against his shoulder, not as a threat but as an extension of himself. Hunters were always respected, feared even, in towns like this. His name was Silas Kane, a man who had once been nothing more than a wanderer, but whose reputation for skill with both rifle and instinct had grown with each passing season. Silas had not planned to stop in Dustwick, but the day had a way of pulling him in, as if fate itself had laid a hand on his shoulder. Spilling laughter and the sharp chords of a piano into the dusty street. It was then that he heard it, a voice sharp and melodic, cutting through the hum of the town like a whip crack. "Wait, name your price." He froze mid-step, his instincts flaring. The voice was familiar, haunting even, carrying with it the memory of another time, another life. His heart thumped against his ribs as he scanned the doorway. There, framed in the golden light of late afternoon, stood a woman whose very presence seemed to command the air around her. She had changed, of course. The girl he had rescued years back was now a woman forged by hardships. Yet her eyes, bright, defiant, and wary still, held the fire he remembered. Her name was Leora Vale. And even after all these years, recognition lit her face. She had been a girl of barely 16 when he had found her, abandoned at the edge of the treacherous Razor Creek, wild-eyed and trembling, chased by men with dark intentions. Silas had saved her then, risking more than he would admit, knowing the wilderness could just as easily swallow him as those who threatened her. He had left without asking for anything in return, content to know she had survived. Her memory, a quiet echo in the recesses of his mind. Now, she stood there in the doorway of the Dustwick Saloon, her hands gripping the edge of the polished wood bar, voice sharp, eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. The room seemed to pause, conversations faltering, a piano note hanging mid-air as she called out his name in that tone that brooked no argument. Silas stepped forward slowly. Dustwick had always been a place of tension, and the saloon itself was a hub of stories and secrets. The bartender, a broad-shouldered man with ink-stained fingers, watched silently, knowing when someone like Silas Kane entered. Trouble or salvation was never far behind. Leora's gaze never wavered. "I said, name your price," she repeated, louder this time, and the words echoed through the saloon like a challenge. Her hand rested near her hip, not on a weapon, but on the edge of her authority. She was no longer the frightened girl from Razor Creek. She had learned to wield her presence, her wits, her charm, as deftly as any gunfighter could wield a pistol. Silas raised a hand slowly, a gesture of peace, though his mind raced. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the wooden walls themselves were holding their breath. He could feel the eyes of the patrons on him, the whispers curling like smoke around the tables. Everyone recognized him, though few would dare approach. Knowing that he was a man who measured his moves with the patience of a predator, years of wandering had taught Silas many things. But nothing could prepare him for the mix of relief, suspicion, and unspoken tension that radiated from Leora Vale. She had survived life's cruelty, grown strong and unyielding, yet there was something she wanted from him, something he could not yet name. The saloon's piano shifted into a soft melody as the pianist resumed, but it no longer filled the room. It merely underscored the charged silence between them. I didn't expect to see you here," Silas said, his voice low but steady. He let his gaze roam over her, noting the slight curve of her jaw, the determination in her posture, the way she seemed poised to either strike or flee. After all these years, why now? She leaned against the bar, a smirk tugging at her lips that did not reach the intensity of her eyes. "I've never forgotten what you did for me," she said, her tone guarded. "Not that I needed saving, but you chose to step in when no one else would. That's worth something, don't you think?" Patrons shuffled quietly, sensing the undercurrent of history that stretched between them, a story untold, yet palpable. Silas's mind drifted back to that day by Razor Creek, the roar of the water, the shadows of men closing in, and the helplessness in Leora's eyes. He had acted without thinking, guided by instinct and a promise to himself that no one would suffer under his watch if he could prevent it. He had saved her, yes, but at a cost he never measured in coins or words. Now, years later, here she stood, offering him a challenge in the form of words. A question that demanded an answer, though the answer was far from simple. Silas knew the power of timing, the weight of choices made in split seconds, and the consequences that lingered long after bullets had been fired and dust had settled. "You want a price?" Silas asked carefully, stepping closer, his voice a low drawl that matched the slow swing of the saloon doors behind him. "Some debts can't be paid in gold or silver." Leora's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Then tell me what I owe. Tell me what it takes to keep the past from catching up with us." Her hand grazed the edge of a chair, a subtle reminder that she was ready for whatever came next. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly masked, and Silas caught it. She had survived this long, but something had chased her here. Something that made her summon him with that defiant call. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the saloon sign and sending a tumbleweed bouncing across the street. The world beyond Dustwick felt distant, a blur of desert and sky, but inside, time seemed to stop. Silas could feel the pull of old memories, the pull of unfinished business, and the pull of a promise unspoken. Leora leaned forward slightly, voice dropping. "I recognized you the moment you walked in. I knew it had to be you." Her hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she rested it on the bar. "Years back, you saved me from a fate I can't forget. And now, I need your help again." Silas's jaw tightened, his mind racing through possibilities. What danger had followed her across the wilderness and the years? What choices had she made that brought her here, and why call on him after all this time? He could feel the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders, a tension that stretched between them like a taut rope. The room was silent. Every eye fixed on them, every breath held in anticipation. Even the piano seemed to pause, as if the music itself had recognized the moment as significant. Dustic had seen many travelers, many hunters, many women who fought their own battles. But few encounters carried the raw intensity that filled this saloon right now. Leora's eyes never left his. "So, Hunter," she said, a faint edge of desperation beneath her bravado, "do you accept my price?" Silas met her gaze, slow and deliberate, weighing the risk and the memory of what had once bound them. He knew the answer would not be simple, and that whatever choice he made now would set the course for more than just one life. The saloon seemed to shrink around them. The clatter of glasses, the murmurs of patrons, the swing of the doors all fading into the background as two fates converged after years of distance. He took a breath, ready to speak, ready to make a move, and the tension reached its peak. The world outside might be waiting with its sun and dust, but inside the saloon, past and present collided, leaving one question hanging in the air like smoke from a fired rifle. What price was worth the past? And could it even be paid in a world as harsh and unforgiving as theirs? This leaves the story on a cliffhanger, fully sets the old American tone, introduces Silas Kane and Leora Vale as powerful central characters, and sets up suspense for the unfolding plot. Silas's eyes never left Leora's. Though his mind was racing faster than the desert wind outside, he could feel the pull of her urgency, the weight of unspoken danger pressing down on her like the heavy wooden beams overhead. The saloon's chatter had faded to a low murmur, and even the piano now ticked a cautious rhythm. as if sensing that something beyond ordinary was unfolding. "I need to know," Leora said softly, almost pleading now, "that you'll do this not because you owe me, but because you choose to? Because you know what's at stake?" Her hand lingered on the bar, knuckles white, as if she was holding herself back from showing the fear beneath her careful composure. Silas remained silent, and in that moment, the memories came rushing back, unbidden and sharp. He remembered the night he found her at Razor Creek. Shivering against the cold rocks, mud streaked across her face, and the way she had looked at him with equal parts suspicion and hope. He had taken her in without question, guided her to safety, and left before the men who had chased her even realized she had escaped. That night had haunted him, not because he feared what he might lose, because he feared that the world would not forgive her or him for stepping into it. "Years back," Leora began, her voice dropping to a whisper, though it carried across the quiet saloon. "You found me when no one else would. You saved me." Silas shifted, the old ache in his shoulders reminding him of the countless miles he had walked since that night, and the countless dangers he had faced in solitude. "And now?" he asked quietly. "What brings you here? Why call me after all this time?" Her gaze flicked toward the back of the saloon, toward a shadowed corner where a group of men lingered, her eyes tracking every movement in the room. Even from a distance, their presence radiated threat, a silent warning. Leora's jaw tightened. "It's not just the past," she said. "Something followed me here, something I thought I had left behind." Silas leaned back slightly, calculating. He had known that life never let go of its debts so easily. Every rescue, every act of mercy, left ripples that eventually returned to touch the one who acted. He could sense the truth in her words. The danger she spoke of was real, immediate, and growing stronger with each passing second. "Tell me what you know," he said, his voice calm but firm. The tone of a man who had survived the wilderness and the wilderness of men alike. "Everything." Leora took a deep breath, as if steeling herself against the memories she had buried for years. "After Razor Creek, I thought I could disappear. I took jobs, moved towns, kept my head down. But some men, they don't forget. They don't forgive. They want what they lost, or what they think they lost. And now they've found me again." Her eyes darted back to the corner, then to the swinging saloon doors. "I didn't come here by chance. I needed a safe place. I needed someone who knows how to survive in a world that doesn't care." Alice studied her, noting the subtle signs of tension, the slight twitch in her shoulder, the restless tapping of her boot against the floor, the way her eyes never strayed far from the doorway. She was brave, yes, but she was also human, and danger had left its mark on her. He had always admired her strength, even as a frightened girl, and now he saw the fire that had grown from that same spark. "The men you speak of," Silas said slowly, "are they the same ones from back then?" Leora shook her head, a faint tremor in her hands betraying her attempt at control. "No, these are new players, men who've learned the old ways, but with new ruthlessness. They know the history, but not all of it, and that makes them dangerous. They'll use what they know against me, against anyone who tries to protect me." Silas's eyes narrowed. He had walked through towns where shadows hid men with guns and knives, where betrayal was as common as whiskey and as deadly as a rattlesnake strike. He had survived because he trusted his instincts, and those instincts screamed that Leora's threat was real and closing in fast. "You've stayed out of sight too long," he said, his voice low. "They've been planning, watching. I can feel it." Leora swallowed hard, her lips tightening. "I thought I could manage. I've always managed. Until now. That's why I called you. You understand the wilderness in a way that no one else does." Silas nodded slowly, taking in the details of the room. Patrons had resumed their conversations, though in quieter tones, glances flicking toward them like whispers carried on the wind. The bartender wiped a glass slowly, pretending not to watch, though even he knew that when Silas Kane stepped into a town, nothing happened without notice. "Safe places are rare," Silas said, almost to himself. Even in towns like this, there's always someone ready to take advantage of fear, of weakness. And I've learned the hard way that danger rarely announces itself. Leora's gaze held his, her eyes reflecting both trust and desperation. "I don't have much time," she admitted. "They're moving fast. They have men outside, and I can feel their reach spreading. I thought if I could find you first, maybe we could stop them before." Her voice faltered, but the threat hung heavier than any spoken word. Silas's hand brushed the butt of his rifle, a quiet reminder of the skills he carried. The years of survival etched into every movement, every decision. It was about facing something old and something new, something that tied past and present together in a web of peril. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "We can't let them corner you. Not here, not like this. But we need a plan, and we need to move carefully. One wrong step, and it won't just be you in danger." Her hand lingered near the edge of the bar, eyes scanning the shadows again, calculating, considering. "I trusted myself to stay hidden for years," she said quietly, "but I can't hide anymore. I've learned that survival isn't just about running. Sometimes you have to face what's coming, even if it's the thing you've been running from all your life." Silas's jaw tightened. He had faced men like this before, threats that came in whispers and shadows, men who thought fear could bend a person. He had learned that the wilderness did not forgive, and neither did men who had spent years honing cruelty into art. He could sense that Leora's enemies were clever, patient, and ruthless men who would not stop until they had everything they thought was theirs. Outside, the wind shifted again, kicking up dust and dry leaves, rattling the saloon sign with a shrill protest. A lone rider could be seen in the distance, approaching slowly, his silhouette sharp against the sun, yet indistinct enough to blur the details. Silas noted the movement, instinctively calculating distance, speed, and intent. The world was moving faster than either of them realized. Leora's voice broke the quiet tension, soft but insistent. "I need to know that you'll do this with me, that you'll face whatever's coming. You saved me once before, Silas. I need that strength now." He looked at her, measuring, remembering, calculating. He had always known that some debts were never truly paid, and that some rescues demanded more than courage, they demanded loyalty, trust, and the willingness to step into danger without hesitation. And yet, even as he considered his answer, the sense of unease grew. The rider outside was moving closer, and somewhere beyond the walls of Dustwick, plans long in the making were beginning to unfold. The past and present were converging, and the shadows whispered of choices yet to be made, of dangers that could not be predicted, and of a story that was far from finished. Silas inhaled the dusty air, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him like the sun-baked heat of the afternoon. Leora's eyes searched his, waiting for a decision, waiting for the promise that he would not let the darkness win. But even he could not yet see the full scope of the threat, nor the lengths to which it would go to claim what it wanted. The saloon seemed to hold its breath, the dust motes dancing in the slanting sunlight like tiny omens. Outside, the rider's shape grew clearer, yet still mysterious, a harbinger of events about to collide with the fragile safety of this town. Leora's hand tightened on the bar, and Silas's fingers brushed the rifle again, readying himself for whatever was about to unfold. Neither spoke for a long moment. Words were unnecessary. The tension between them said more than speech ever could. The past had caught up, the present demanded vigilance, and the future. The future was a shadow that neither of them could yet step into with certainty. And in that silence, with the wind rattling boards and the approaching rider cutting through the golden haze, the question remained, could they face what was coming together? Or would the forces gathering in the shadows claim the day before it had even begun? The wind carried a restless energy through Dustwick, rattling shutters and sending dry leaves skittering across the boardwalks. Silas Kane and Leora Vale remained in the saloon, but the space between them was charged with an unspoken urgency. Outside, the lone rider slowed, scanning the street with a careful, deliberate gaze. There was no mistaking the purpose behind those movements. The past had arrived, and it had legs. Leora lowered her voice, almost a whisper, though each word cut sharply through the quiet hum of the saloon. That rider, he's a scout. One of them. He's marking the town, mapping our movements. We can't stay here much longer. Her fingers tapped a rapid rhythm against the polished bar, betraying the calm she tried to project. They've learned patience. They've learned how to wait for weakness. He had seen men like this before, men who stalked towns and preyed on fear like wolves. His hand lingered over the rifle, the familiar weight grounding him. Patience and planning make them dangerous, he said. But patience can also make them predictable. We just need to know their patterns, and we can use it against them. Leora's gaze softened slightly, but only for a heartbeat. You always think about patterns, don't you? That's how you survive the wilderness. But this isn't the wild. It's people, their greed, their anger, their grudges. She leaned closer, lowering her voice even further. Anyone who helps me will be in danger too. Silas's mind turned to the townsfolk, the bartender, the pianist, the few travelers scattered across Dustwick. They were unaware of the storm brewing, yet even now, their fates were intertwined with his and Leora's. He had never been one to draw attention, and he had no intention of turning the town into a battlefield. Still, the presence of these enemies meant that every choice mattered, and the smallest misstep could ignite chaos. Outside, the rider disappeared behind a cluster of buildings, and Silas could hear the faint jingle of spurs receding down the dusty street. He exhaled slowly, though his body remained tense. We need allies, he said. People who understand the land and know how to read danger. We can't face this alone. Leora nodded. There's someone you should meet, she said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. A tracker. She's lived on the edge of the wilderness for years. Knows every ridge, every canyon, every secret path into and out of Dustwick. If anyone can help us anticipate them, it's her. Silas's mind shifted immediately to strategy. Allies were precious, especially in a place where loyalty was rare and survival often depended on cold judgment rather than trust. And what about her? He asked. Will she agree to help? Or will we have to earn her trust first? She tests us, Leora admitted. She doesn't trust easily, and for good reason. But she knows the stakes, and she knows what's coming. That's why I went to her first. If we can't get her on our side, we'll be facing this alone. And that's not an option. The saloon doors swung open again, this time creaking under a heavier push. A man in a long duster and a wide-brimmed hat stepped inside, boots thudding against the boards with a confidence that drew every eye. His presence demanded attention, and a hush fell over the room. Silas recognized the type immediately. A man comfortable in shadows, patient, observant. Not a brute, but dangerous all the same. Leora tensed, her hand brushing the edge of her belt, but she didn't move beyond the bar. The man's eyes scanned the room. Noting their positions as if recording every detail in his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, and unsettling. Dustwick's changing, he said. New blood in old towns always brings trouble. And trouble, it tends to follow the smart ones. Silas's hands stayed close to the rifle, but he did not reach for it. He studied the man, trying to read intent to gauge the danger. And you are? He asked. The man's lips curled into a faint, cold smile. I'm a friend of sorts, he said. But friends aren't always obvious, and enemies aren't always clear. Just know this. The game is bigger than Dustwick, and bigger than either of you. You think saving one life ends the story? It only begins it. Leora's eyes narrowed, and she shot Silas a brief look, a silent warning. This was not a man who would be placated by words or charm. He was a piece of the threat she had feared, and his arrival made the stakes undeniable. The stranger moved toward the back of the saloon, his boots making no more sound than a shadow. He stopped by the bartender, exchanging a few low words before disappearing into a side room. Silas exhaled, tension coiling in his chest like a rattlesnake. He had expected trouble, but this was more organized, more deliberate than he had anticipated. Leora's voice was quiet, urgent. He's just the first of many. They've learned patience, but they've also learned timing. They'll move when the moment is right, and we won't even know it until it's too late. Silas considered the possibilities. He knew the wilderness taught patience, taught calculation, and taught fear in ways that towns never could. But here in Dustwick, the dangers were subtler, human, and clever. He had to anticipate their moves, find allies, and prepare for a confrontation that might reach beyond the town itself. He moved to the piano, setting his rifle against the edge, and scanned the patrons. The pianist's fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain. The bartender continued polishing glasses, eyes flicking toward the stranger who had disappeared into the side room. Everyone was watching, yet no one knew how deeply this threat ran. Leora leaned closer, her voice low. "There's more," she said. "I didn't just call you because of what they want from me. They're after something from my family, from people long gone, something they think I've hidden. If they get it, it won't just be me in danger. It'll change everything in Dustwick." Silas's mind raced. He had faced greedy men, desperate men, and violent men before, but this threat carried history. Stakes he hadn't yet fully understood. Dustwick wasn't just a town. It was a crossroads of secrets, and whatever these men were after could unravel more than a single life. Outside, the rider returned, moving slower now, eyes scanning the saloon's windows, reflecting the fading light. Silas noticed the subtle signal in the way the man raised his arm briefly, a gesture only another trained eye might catch. It was a warning, a mark of intent, a message that danger was closer than anyone inside realized. Leora's gaze followed his. She whispered, almost to herself, "They know we're here. They know we're planning. And now, they're deciding how to strike first." Silas placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying, reassuring. "We'll handle this," he said, though he didn't yet know how. "But we have to be smart. Move carefully. Trust only those who've proven themselves." The saloon's back door creaked open again, and the shadow of another figure slipped through, blending with the growing dusk. The danger was no longer a whisper or a threat on the horizon. It was here, pressing in from all sides, and Silas could feel the threads of the conflict tightening around them. Leora's hand found his. Brief, almost instinctive, a silent acknowledgement that their fates were intertwined. She wasn't just asking for protection, she was offering a partnership. A bond forged in fire and fear, one that could either save them or drag them both into ruin. Silas nodded subtly. "We need information. We need allies. And we need to know their limits before they know ours." His eyes swept over the patrons once more. Every choice counts now. One misstep, and it won't just be a warning shot. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the distant howl of a coyote and the faint clatter of hooves. The rider's shadow moved past the street lamps, fleeting but precise, deliberate. Silas knew the time for hesitation was passing. Every moment they stayed in Dustwick, the danger grew sharper, closer, more personal. The stranger in the side room emerged briefly, watching, calculating, then disappeared again. Dustwick had become a chessboard, each movement measured, every piece significant. And the hunters and hunted were no longer separate. The lines had blurred. And the first real moves of the conflict were about to unfold. Silas's fingers brushed the rifle again, heart steady despite the tightening tension. Leora's eyes held his, fierce and unwavering, and for a brief moment, the saloon seemed to shrink to just the two of them against a world that had grown suddenly unpredictable. And outside, shadows deepened. Every creak of the boards, every flicker of light, every whisper of wind could carry danger. The stage was set, the pieces moving into position. And the first strike was waiting, ready to remind them that nothing in Dustwick was as simple as it seemed. The past, the present, and the unknown future were converging. And Silas and Leora stood at the center of it, aware that survival would demand more than skill or courage. It would demand foresight, trust, and the willingness to face whatever darkness was coming for them. This section expands the conflict in multiple layers, introduces organized threats, subplots with allies, and history tied to Leora's family while keeping the suspense unresolved and the tension building. The sky over Dustwick had taken on a bruised shade of purple, the sun sinking behind jagged hills that cast long shadows across the town. Silas Kane and Leora Vale had moved from the saloon to a quieter building near the edge of town, a place with a back alley and shuttered windows, offering some cover from prying eyes. But even here, the air was thick with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Every sound, the scrape of a boot, the faint jingle of metal, the whisper of wind set Silas on edge. Leora stood by the window, hands pressed lightly against the frame, scanning the street below. The rider from earlier had returned, this time accompanied by another figure. The way they moved suggested precision, coordination. They weren't just scouting anymore. They were claiming territory, marking the lines for a confrontation that neither she nor Silas could ignore. "They're bold," she murmured, voice tight. "They've learned to wait, to watch. They know patience can kill faster than a gun." Silas stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've seen what patience can do, yes. But we also know what it can't do. They can't predict everything. They can't account for instinct, and they can't account for courage." His eyes swept the street below, calculating positions, noting the shadows where men could hide. Every detail mattered now. Leora turned to him, her eyes sharp but carrying a flicker of trust that had grown over the past days. "We'll need more than courage," she said. "We'll need planning, timing, and the right people on our side. Then we start now. We figure out their patterns, anticipate their moves, and use what they don't see coming against them." He glanced at the door, then back to her. "And we prepare for the moment they strike, because they will soon." The sound of hooves echoed down the street, and Silas stiffened. Outside, the rider and his companion had begun moving faster. Approaching the town center, cutting a path with careful precision, Dustwick's residents went about their business, oblivious to the danger closing in. But for Silas and Leora, every heartbeat carried the weight of looming conflict. "We can't let them corner us in the streets," Leora said. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. But there was a fire in her eyes that had always been there, from the first moment he had rescued her. "They'll push us into a trap. We need a plan that gives us the advantage." Silas considered the options. The surrounding hills offered vantage points, escape routes, and natural cover. The town's layout, narrow streets and alleys, could be turned into an advantage if they moved quickly and decisively. But the enemy was methodical, patient, and clever. They had not arrived unprepared. "I'll take the high ground," Silas said, his voice calm but deliberate. "We'll observe, learn their moves. If we coordinate, we can turn their patience against them." Leora nodded, determination overtaking fear. "She knows the terrain better than anyone," she said. "If she joins us, we might just have a chance." Oust deepened into night. The shadows lengthened. Silas moved quietly through back alleys, every sense alert. The town's noises, the occasional bark of a dog, the distant whistle of a train, the scrape of a wagon mixed with the tension in the air, creating a soundtrack that tightened nerves. He could feel the presence of the approaching enemies, their strategies forming like dark clouds above the desert horizon. Meanwhile, Leora made her way toward the outskirts, toward the hideout of the tracker she had mentioned. Her mind raced with memories of the past, of Silas saving her, of narrow escapes and quiet moments in the wilderness where they had both survived against odds that seemed impossible. She knew that whatever happened tonight, she couldn't face it alone. And yet, herself, the tracker's cabin was small, tucked among rocks and low shrubs, almost invisible from the road. The door opened before Leora could knock, revealing a woman whose presence was immediate and commanding. Her hair was dark, streaked with silver, and her eyes were sharp and unyielding, kind of gaze that read intention before words were spoken. This was Kalen Rourke, a name spoken quietly with respect among those who knew the wilderness as intimately as she did. "You came," Kalen said, her voice firm, measuring. "I heard whispers that you needed help. You didn't come for me lightly." Leora stepped inside, relief and tension mixing in equal measure. "I didn't," she said, "not lightly. Something's coming to Dustwick. Men from my past. Men who've learned patience and cruelty. We need your help. I can't face them alone. I need someone who understands what it takes to survive against people who don't follow the rules of honor." Kellen's gaze softened, just slightly. "But understand this, patience and strategy aren't the same as luck. And luck. Luck has run thin for those who wait for the wrong moment." Back in the town center, Silas observed the enemy movements from his vantage point atop the ridge. They were testing, probing, preparing to strike with precision. Silas noted the patterns, memorizing positions, estimating speed, and calculating risk. He was aware that the slightest miscalculation could result in disaster, not just for him, but for Leora and anyone else caught in the crossfire. The night deepened. And with it came the sounds of tension, the scrape of boots on boards, the distant mutter of voices, the soft clatter of a dropped tool in a deserted alley. Silas's fingers brushed the rifle, his muscles coiled like springs, ready for action. Every sense was attuned, every instinct sharpened. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This was personal. Leora and Kalen moved cautiously through the darkness, meeting Silas at a predetermined location. Together, the three of them formed a quiet but formidable trio, each bringing skills honed through experience and necessity. Side by side, suddenly, a faint cry echoed from the other side of town, a signal, a warning, or perhaps an attempt to lure them into a trap. Silas's jaw tightened. The enemies had begun to make their first moves, testing the defenses, observing reactions, and looking for openings. The tension escalated sharply, quiet dread giving way to a pulse of imminent confrontation. "We have to be ready," Silas whispered, scanning the streets below. "They'll strike soon. We hold until they make the first move. Then we respond, fast, precise, and without hesitation." Leora's hand found his, a brief but grounding touch. "I'm ready," she said. Her eyes reflected determination and fear in equal measure. "We've waited long enough. It's time to face whatever comes." Kalen nodded, her voice calm but firm. "We know the terrain, we know the town, and we know what patience looks like. Now we see how courage looks." "And courage," she said, glancing at both Silas and Leora, "is the only thing that will matter when they come for us." The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of hooves and movement from the outskirts. Shadows shifted in the alleys, subtle but unmistakable. Silas adjusted his grip on the rifle, every muscle ready. Leora's breath came in shallow, controlled rhythm, her eyes scanning every corner, every window, every shadow. Kellen's presence was steadying, a reminder that experience could balance fear, that preparation could counter the unknown. The stage was set. Dustwick had become a chessboard of shadows, strategy, and waiting, with the three of them at the center. The enemy was patient, the stakes were high, and the night held secrets yet to be revealed. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light could signal the moment when tension broke into action. Silas looked at Leora, then at Kalen. "We hold until they make their move," he said quietly. "Then we respond. Together. Nothing gets past us tonight." Outside, the wind carried another whisper, a shadow slipping closer. The first threads of conflict tightening around Dustwick. The night stretched, heavy with anticipation, and the moment before chaos broke was almost tangible. Dustwick waited, breath held, as past, present, and danger converged on the horizon, and in the quiet tension, each heartbeat marked the approach of what was coming, the confrontation that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their skill. The night had grown dark, but the fire within them, the determination to survive, burned brighter than ever. The first move was coming. This section builds maximum suspense, develops Silas, Leora, and Kellen's teamwork, introduces multiple perspectives of threat, and escalates tension toward the climax without resolving the conflicts. The night air over Dustwick was sharp and dry, carrying the scent of gunpowder and dust, mingling with the faint traces of smoke from a distant fire. Silas Kane crouched behind the ridge overlooking the town, every sense alert. Leora Vale and Kalen Rourke flanked him, their eyes scanning the streets below. The first strike had begun, subtle at first, a shadow darting across a boardwalk. The soft jingle of spurs in the distance, but now, the enemy had fully revealed itself, moving with the precision of men who believed patience would carry them to victory. Silas adjusted his rifle, feeling the familiar weight grounding him. This was what he had trained for, what he had faced countless times in the wilderness. Yet tonight, it was different. This wasn't just survival. It was about protecting Leora, about safeguarding the people who had no idea that danger was threading its way into their town. He cast a quick glance at Kalen, whose calm presence was a tether against the rising tension. "They're moving too fast," Leora whispered, her voice tight. Silas nodded, formulating a plan in his mind. "We draw them in one direction," he said. "Make them think we're retreating. Then we trap them where we can control the fight." He looked at Kalen. "You know the alleys better than anyone. Lead them through the narrow streets. Leora and I will cover the approach. They'll underestimate us. That's their mistake. Let's use it." They moved with the careful, deliberate stealth of predators. Silas kept low, scanning shadows, listening to every sound. Leora followed, each step purposeful, but she couldn't hide the tension coiled in her shoulders. Kalen guided them through the alleys, pointing out vantage points, narrow passages, and weak spots in the enemy's movement. Every detail mattered. The first clash came unexpectedly. One of the enemy scouts emerged from the shadows too quickly, and Silas acted without hesitation. A precise shot rang out, cutting the figure down before a warning could be sounded. The other men froze for a moment, assessing the sudden loss. The advantage shifted, but only slightly. The enemy was skilled, organized, and relentless. Leora ducked behind a wooden crate, heart pounding, but her eyes never left the approaching threats. She had faced fear before, but this was different. The stakes were higher. The lives around her depended on her focus and her courage. "Silas," she whispered, "there are too many of them coming from the south alley. We'll be trapped if we don't act now. Then we force the confrontation on our terms. Kalen, block the south alley with what you can. Leora, with me? We'll draw them toward the ridge." Kalan nodded, disappearing into the shadows to implement the plan. The three of them moved as one, every step coordinated, every breath measured. The enemy unaware of how carefully the trap was being laid. Then came the moment of chaos. The enemy split their forces, moving to flank them from multiple directions. Dustwick streets echoed with the sounds of movement, shouts, boots on boards, the clatter of metal. They fired strategically, forcing the attackers to pause, reassess, move into positions that Kalen had prepared. One by one, the enemy fell into the carefully constructed trap. Narrow alleys and hidden vantage points worked in favor of the defenders. Silas's sharpshooting, Kellen's knowledge of the terrain, and Leora's courage and intuition combined seamlessly. The enemy underestimated them, believing that surprise and numbers would be enough to overwhelm. But they had not accounted for experience, strategy, and the bond that now held the three together. Hours passed in a blur of tense movements and rapid decisions. The last of the enemy forces attempted a desperate push toward the town center, but Silas and Leora anticipated it, intercepting them at a choke point Kalen had identified. By dawn, the streets of Dustwick lay quiet. The enemy vanquished, retreating into the wilderness. defeated not by sheer force, but by careful planning, courage, and teamwork. The town slowly came alive again, unaware of the danger that had passed. Dustwick's residents emerged from their homes and businesses, blinking against the first light of morning, oblivious to how close they had come to chaos. Silas lowered his rifle, shoulders relaxing slightly, but his eyes never left Leora and Kalen. They had survived, but the night had tested them in ways that left traces unseen. Lingering beneath the surface, Leora stepped forward, her expression a mixture of relief and reflection. "We did it," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "We actually did it." Alan's gaze swept over the town, assessing, ensuring there were no remaining threats. "This isn't the end," she said, "but we've bought ourselves time. And that time, it's something you can use." Silas finally allowed himself a small smile, the tension easing just enough to notice the sunrise, casting golden light across Dustwick. "Time is worth more than any gold or silver," he said. "It's what we make of it that matters." They walked back toward the saloon, moving carefully through the streets, now quiet under the rising sun. The town had survived, the danger had been contained, and the past that had once threatened to overwhelm Leora and Silas had been faced and overcome. But more than survival, something else had emerged: trust, respect, and a bond forged under fire and tension that could not be broken easily. At the saloon, Leora paused, looking out over the street. "It's strange," she said, voice thoughtful. "All those years ago, you saved me. And now, you were here again, not just saving me, but helping to protect everything else I care about. How do you repay a debt like that?" Silas shook his head, quiet but firm. "Some debts aren't repaid with gold or words. They're repaid with action, with loyalty, and with standing by the people who trust you when it matters most." He glanced at Kalen. "And sometimes they're repaid by living to see the sun rise and knowing you did the right thing." Kalen smiled faintly, a rare softness in her expression. "The wilderness teaches that the smallest actions matter most." Leora turned to them both, her eyes shining. "Then we start from here. Dustwick can survive tonight, but the world outside will always test us. We can't control that, but we can control what we do when those tests come." Silas's gaze drifted toward the horizon, the sun now lifting fully over the hills. "We faced the shadows and stood our ground. That's all anyone can ask. And sometimes, that's enough to make a difference." The three of them walked back into the town together, a quiet understanding between them. Dustwick's streets were still and peaceful under the early morning light, the events of the night leaving traces only they could see. But in their hearts, a lesson lingered. Courage, loyalty, and careful planning could outmatch even the most patient and ruthless threats. Leora paused outside the saloon one last time, looking at the wooden buildings, the empty streets, the golden light painting the town in warmth. "We'll need to stay vigilant," she said softly. "But for now, we can breathe. For now, we can trust that what we did matters." Silas nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion mixed with relief. "And tomorrow, we continue. Stronger, wiser, and together. That's the only way forward." Kellen's eyes swept over them both, steady and sure. "The past tried to catch you. The present challenged you. But the future is ours to shape." As the morning fully broke over Dustwick, life slowly returned to the town. Horses trotted down the streets, doors opened, and townsfolk moved about, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. But for Silas, Leora, and Kalen, the night had changed them. They had faced danger, confronted history, and survived. They had learned that survival was more than staying alive. It was about standing for something, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and trusting in the bond between those who fight together. The sun rose fully now, bathing Dustwick in light. Silas, Leora, and Kalen stood at the edge of town, looking toward the hills beyond. The danger had passed for now, but the lessons remained etched in their hearts. They had faced the shadows, navigated the threats, and emerged stronger, ready for whatever came next. And in that moment, Dustwick seemed peaceful, whole, and full of promise, a town that could endure because those who cared had stood when it mattered most. For Silas Kane, Leora Vale, and Kalen Rourke, the world was vast and uncertain, but together, they had proven that courage, trust, and careful action could face any challenge. And even the darkest night could give way to sunrise. The town had survived. The heroes had endured. And for the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to hope. This wraps up the story with a satisfying resolution. Maintains the old American style, resolves the major conflicts, concludes the subplots, and leaves a reflective, uplifting ending without breaking immersion.